If you have any questions during your ride, feel free to ask your train crew. Dwight is your brakeman today. He's off at the depot making sure we don't leave someone behind, and I'm Ron, your conductor. If you have any questions about our railroad, the Georgetown Silver Plume area, or your Colorado travels, we'd be glad to answer questions. Inside the train now, you'll see Clear Creek coming this way to the Georgetown Valley. That's the stream we gave our county its name, Clear Creek County. It was Georgetown and with their water much colder than the river. In the early days, this railroad was called a stubborn branch line out of Denver. It was a very busy and successful railroad, however, bringing the miners, the families, and supplies up to the mountain mining communities. It also took a lot of the rich gold and silver ore back down to Golden and Denver to the mills for processing. It continued very well until the year 1892, the year of the so-called silver crash. That was the year the German Silver Purchase Act was repealed and the price of silver dropped so low. On switchbacks up to the old mining town of Waldorf at 11,500 feet. That little town once had the highest United States post office. Well, the railroad didn't just stop there. It switched back to the top of Mount McClellan at an elevation of 13,500 feet for a grand view of the Rocky Mountains in all directions. They call that railroad the Stairway to the Stars, and they use shade-geared locomotives for their motive power. Well, passenger service continued quite lively on into the 1920s, but by then, automobiles, roads, and highways were becoming so popular, most people were finding that a preferred method of transportation to the old narrow gauge train. Finally, the Colorado and Southern discontinued their regular passenger service in 1927. They continued to run a couple mixed trains a week for several more years, but by the late 1930s, all the railroad business here was so poor, they filed for abandonment. That was granted by the government, and we've operated every year since then. 1984 saw the completion of the new high bridge, and we're now in our 26th season of operation of the entirely rebuilt Georgetown Loop Railroad. We're going around the so-called high fill curve now. Look off the right side of the train here as soon as we clear these aspen trees, and we'll get a great view down the valley toward the high bridge and the city of Georgetown. If you look to the left, you'll see how this track has been built on a high fill of dirt and rock. They hauled in here in the 1880s to keep us dead straight to the line. We are on the steepest part of our railroad right now, a descending 4% grade. That means that for every 100 feet of forward travel, we drop. Here on the left, on the inside of the curve, is a big flat area known as the ballpark. Now, over 100 years ago, there were no trees in this valley. They'd all been cut down during the mining area to build cabins, mine structures, the baseball diamond.
Ballpark.
Miners love to play baseball. You may join your families here for the original Colorado Rockies team playing here at that time. I don't know how they compare today, of course. You see, they were playing minor league baseball. Now, our railroad is narrow gauge, 3 foot, 36 inches between the rails, just like the original Colorado and Southern and GB&L. Most of our railroads in the United States use standard gauge, 4 feet, 8 1/2 inches between the rails. In the early days of mountain railroad building, narrow gauge was much more practical for several reasons. The cost was only a third that of a standard gauge line. Just think what a difficult task that must have been when going through rugged terrain like this huge boulder field we're entering now. Pine area. Our forest consists mainly of lodgepole and liver pine and Douglas fir. You'll see an occasional juniper, and the smaller bushes include willow, mountain mahogany, and mountain maple. Yes, you do see a number of dead trees, which has hit not only Colorado in many areas, but other states in our country as well. Might keep your eyes open for wildlife. We do see deer. We see mule deer in the forest, not far from our train at times. And over there on the cliffs on the north side of I-70, we see bighorn sheep quite often. All the way from here down to Idaho Springs, as you're driving I-70, in fact. The bighorn sheep is the official Colorado state animal. Just off the left side as we cross this trestle, this is our first of 4 crossings of Clear Creek as we wind our way down the valley. There's a nice waterfall to be seen here. Your cameras are handy. And just beyond this trestle, we pass through a narrow cut in the mountainside. And you'll notice these retaining walls on the other side. We get back to the 1880s, and we built by the Thomas miners, and we look at the doctrine of these walls, and we built them so well, they're all still here today, 130 years later, at the Lebanon silver mine. Please wait until the train comes to a complete stop before you stand up. You'll hear a single toot from the whistle indicating that we're stopped, and then work your way to the covered car right behind the engine, and we'll let you off here. Be sure to have your personal belongings with you, because we'll be continuing on, picking up more people. We'll be back with the next scheduled train to finish your entire train ride. Also, have your tickets ready to show to your mine tour guides. Leading down the hill past the red vehicle towards several buildings where the Lebanon mine is located. Just a little ways down the trail, you see an old rusty ore bucket by a wooden portal in the side of the mountain. That's the entrance to the Everett Silver Mine, a sister mine to the Lebanon where the actual tour takes place. The sister mine means those two mines are connected with a cross coming back inside the mountain. In this case, it's about 1,200 feet inside the mountain. Georgetown actually was named for George Griffin, one of the early miners who settled in the valley. And Silver Plume, where most of the miners live. See a triangle-shaped hole behind the fencing, which is level 5. Level 4 was torn out when the building. And way up high on the hill you can see some rock work in the westbound diesel train. They're coming up the hill right now in the uphill rolling stock. And over here by the Ingersoll Rand air compressor, you can see the stone foundation of the old boiler and workhouse, which unfortunately burned back in the 1960s. The Hall Tunnel does have an interesting history. It was begun as a transportation tunnel. They planned to drill all the way through Leavenworth Mountain here in order to serve mines in the next valley south of here and bring their ore out to the railroad for shipment to Denver. However, after they got the tunnel and they partially dug into the mountain, they had a big surprise one day. They ran into rich veins of silver after the other train goes by. Narrow gauge, built by the Porter Locomotive Works back in 1946. It originally worked in California at Plaster City at the U.S. Gypsum Narrow Gauge Railway. This engine utilizes a 600 horsepower triple-piston diesel engine. To get back on the main. And you wonder what that big blast of steam is from our steam engine. That's called the blowdown. There's a valve at the bottom of the boiler which will blow out subtle scale in the boiler. I have to do that every now and then. As soon as we get by the switch here with our train, Dwight will switch back to main line, and he'll be hopping on board the tail end of our train here before we get underway again. But first we have to cross the high bridge and make a full 360-degree loop through the valley to lose that much elevation. They designed a route that would double back through the valley and loop over its own track in order to gain that elevation more gradually and hold the average grade of the railroad to a little over 3%. In so doing, they increased the distance by rail from Georgetown to Silver Plume to 4.5 miles. At the time this loop railroad was built, there were a few other such loop lines built around the world, mostly in Europe, but in all other cases, portions of those other loop railroads were hidden inside a tunnel. This was the only one built completely out in the open, with the upper track crossing the lower on a spectacular curved iron bridge. When they built the first bridge here on the Georgetown Loop in 1884, it took on the nickname Devil's Gate Viaduct. That's because right below the bridge, there is a narrow, rocky part of the Clear Creek Canyon called the Devil's Gate by the early residents of Georgetown. It was kind of a favorite hiking area. They had a walking bridge that went across it at that time. And they called it the Devil's Gate because when the wind would whistle and moan through those rocks, it could be heard way down in town. And people said it sounded like the devil. So that's where the name Devil's Gate came from. We have several such mileposts along our line, exactly where they used to be 100 years ago.
Dry stone wall built 1880.
Well, that whistle indicates we're about to cross over the Devil's Gate High Bridge. Since the bridge does span the mouth of the canyon here, it tends to be a little breezy out there, so be careful of hats and caps as we cross over. The bridge itself is 300 feet in length. That's the same length as an American football field. It's built on an 18.5 degree curve and a 2% grade. Now it might look level to you, but the end we start from is 6 feet higher than the far end of the bridge. Once you're out in the middle, if you don't mind looking straight down, Clear Creek will be 100 feet below you and the lower track of the railroad 75 feet down. Off the right side, a bird's eye view of Georgetown. And to the left, our Devil's Gate Station. The little platforms you see out on the bridge are historically correct. The original high bridge had those, as did many other early railway trestles around the country. They originally held water barrels in case of fire started by the coal-burning steam locomotives. And we heard on the news that one of the big trestles down on the Cumbres and Toltec Railroad in southern Colorado had a fire on their bridge. We're going over old U.S. Highway 6 right now, the predecessor of I-7. On the left side here you see a stone monument placed by the highway. It was put there by the Colorado Historical Society in 1949 to commemorate the original Georgetown Railroad and High Bridge. Little did they realize when they placed the monument that about 30 years in the future the railroad would be rebuilt with trains again operating over the loop. In Hawaii on the Kalahui Railroad, hauling sugar cane and pineapple products. Says. Engine 12 is a 262 Prairie type locomotive, weighs 41 tons. The cars you're riding in are all original narrow gauge freight cars that have been converted to passenger service. They're over 100 years old now and originally served Now we're going to make our fourth and final crossing of Clear Creek, since leaving Silver Plume. Silver Plume just a bit over a mile away as the crow flies, but we've used nearly 3 miles of track to get us down here, and we have dropped 450 feet in elevation since leaving the Silver Plume Depot. In just a couple minutes, we'll be pulling into the Devil's Gate Station at the eastern end of our railroad. We'll be down here for about 15 minutes. Departure time the 11:20. We'll be here for at least 20 minutes. We wouldn't want you to miss your ride back up the hill. It's a long walk back to Silver Plume. This is Devil's Gate Station.